Did you hear that? Maybe if we are quiet, it will come closer. We are about as far from civilization as you can get. Isn't it exciting? Who knows what we might encounter tonight? I'm glad you decided to tag along, dear. You've been such a great help to me. When we first met in the Whirling in Rags, I could tell right away that you had an open mind. I like open-minded people. Most people look at me like I'm mad when I tell them I hunt cryptids. They call it pseudoscience, but that's not the case at all. Cryptozoology is a subfield of zoology, a subfield specializing in animal species that are so rare many assume them to be extinct or even fictitious. A controversial field for certain, but not one to merely be swept aside or scoffed at. We cannot rule out the existence of these creatures just because it is unproven. They must exist, at least some of them. New species are discovered all the time in remote places like this, and statistically speaking, a few of them must be a bit more interesting and unique than just a salamander with a slightly different pattern or a new type of beetle. Searching for cryptids is often difficult and thankless, and frankly, many scientists are too lazy to do it. The sort of fieldwork we are performing tonight hardly ever gets any funding. We have to pay for every expense ourselves. But no one gets into cryptozoology for the money. The cryptids are shrouded in mystery, and we are often limited to undocumented witness reports. These creatures represent the wondrously monstrous, and until documented, occupy a vague space between science, folklore, and urban legends. The one we're looking for tonight is a phasmid, technically. Phasmids are a diverse group of insects whose bodies resembles twigs, leaves, and so on. They rely heavily on camouflage. The one that has been spotted in this area, the Insulindian Phasmid, imitates reeds. It is believed that it disguises itself amongst the reeds here along the coast. It's not made up, dear, I can assure you. It is simply very elusive. A couple of teenagers camping saw it in the area a few weeks ago. They didn't know what it was, of course, but there was a brief article about it in the local newspaper, detailing their encounter with what they called a ghost insect that looked like the reeds. Of course, most articles like that turns out to be false leads, but their description matched the Insulindian Phasmid perfectly, and they didn't even know what they were looking at. The traps we set up by the water might catch it tonight, if it's interested in some of the bait. But we might, of course, stumble upon something completely unknown tonight. You never know. We do need to stay awake though, so to pass the time, let me tell you about a few other cryptids that I have studied in the past. The most dangerous cryptid, I believe, is the one known as the Gnome of Geroma. None of its victims survived. Grieving family members never even found their bodies because the gnome's venom dissolves organic tissue. It was, reportedly, a small creature with webbed fingers and a protruding forehead. An ungainly little thing, quite scary to look at. A couple of hikers found it when it was already dying. They heard an odd wailing in the woods and followed the sound. They were scared and wrapped it in tarpaulin to suffocate it. It still took the gnome an entire day to die. The first scientist that got his hands on the creature put its body in a jar of formaldehyde, thinking it would detoxify the creature's venom. Instead, all of the venom leaked out of the creature's teeth and into the surrounding liquid, dissolving the creature itself. A poetic end, perhaps, but a real loss for science. And no, there were no photos taken of the creature beforehand. I understand your skepticism, dear, but that's what often happens with things that are rare and stand out. The most memorable thing about them is their disappearance, and they are least likely to be found again. There is also an invisible cryptid, the Daqua, meaning thin whisper of sound, and that's precisely what it seems to be. Self-replicating sound waves, invisible and intangible. It's very afraid of us, which makes it very difficult to track. The Daqua makes, or rather is, such a high-pitched sound that other animals, including humans, cannot hear it. They could be anywhere and everywhere, all of the time. We wouldn't know. Many scientists have asked how an animal can be a sound. Some have claimed that it isn't itself a sound, but a tiny corpuscle that emits sound waves. But there's no evidence to support this theory. Back in the 20s, a group of aeropagite ornithologists, scientists who study birds, were trying out a new recording technology for capturing sounds outside of human hearing. When playing back recordings they had made in the foothills of the Aya Mountains, they noticed certain anomalies, patterns that seemed random at first, but upon closer examination were consistent with the waveforms of songbirds. The scientists soon discovered that they could track and even predict what appeared to be feeding, mating, and migration patterns based on sound waves in a strictly delimited range of ultrasonic frequencies, even higher than those of the highest-pitched bats. They realized that they had discovered a new species and called them the Daqua, after the Pericarnassian name for the voice of God, which is said to be very silent. They grew quite obsessed with these little creatures. Even though they couldn't see them, they could distinguish between individuals and even began to name some of them. I'm afraid they're even rarer now than when they were first discovered. A group of university students assisting with the fieldwork decided, out of enthusiasm for the project and, no doubt, because they were preoccupied with impressing their professors, and nearly drove the Mama Daqua to extinction. They tried to communicate with them and had no other means than sound. So they started sending out sound waves at frequencies they thought might match the Mama Daquas. And what happens when a sound wave meets another sound wave of the same frequency? They cancel each other out. And these tests were performed so recklessly that when they happened upon just the right frequency, well, they wiped out most of the population. The rest of them appears to have migrated elsewhere. There have been reports of anomalies similar to those spotted in Aya, but they are few and far between. It's impossible to confirm the presence of any stable population of Mama Daqua anywhere else. The biggest cryptid ever sighted is the giant of Koko Nur. It lives in the most arid parts of the Koko Nur desert in South Samara, casting a strange light across the barren wastes. A sort of mirage or a psychogenous luminance. No one knows its size for certain, but eyewitness accounts describes it as an awful mountain appearing from below the horizon and expanding to cover almost a third of your field of vision. In local folklore, it's a bad omen. Some think it's just a fata morgana, but I believe it might be real. A creature surviving on the very limits of what's scientifically possible. It must be the largest animal the planet can support. There are limits, you see, to how large a metabolism an ecosystem can beget. Some say a gravity anomaly below the desert might have allowed this creature to grow to such a gargantuan size. On the other extreme, the smallest cryptid ever recorded is a unicellular bacteria discovered on one of the northernmost points of Katla on the Boreal Plateau by geologist Katlensis some 70 years ago. This particular bacterial colony has remained alive while frozen in ice for longer than anyone could reliably estimate, certainly since before recorded history. Michanu disappeared shortly after she injected herself with the bacteria she had brought back to study, undoubtedly in hopes of prolonging her own life. So there might be an immortal geologist wandering the world, and she's quite mad too. After she injected herself, she stopped aging, but she also became increasingly eccentric and irascible. It is safe to assume that she has lived somewhere in the wilderness for decades now, all alone, except for the Cryobacter Katlensis coursing through her bloodstream. You look a bit pale, dear. I hope I haven't unnerved you. Some of these creatures might seem a bit on the dark side, but remember that we are doing this for a higher cause, science. And since it's so difficult for me to get around, I really appreciate that you took the time to join me tonight. I do believe it's almost time to check the traps again and restock the bait if necessary. So why don't you get started with that? And don't forget to bring a headlight. It's pitch black out there. I'll wait here and go through the latest newspaper articles on possible cryptid sightings. Go on then. Best get it done, sooner rather than later, dear. And try to be quiet. The Phasmid is bound to be skittish and easily scared away. Good luck out there, and be careful.